addressing a really important problem. We're just going to wait a couple minutes and to give more people to sign on. So we'll go silent for another couple minutes, and then we'll get started. Really want to express my appreciation to all of you out there, and in particular, 3 of our national partners, the Amateur Athletic Union, AAU, U.S. Lacrosse, and U.S. Tennis Association, who have helped promote this webinar. Positive Coaching Alliance is about using sports to develop better competitors and better people. And we think about it, we believe there's no better place to teach character and life lessons, to build the leaders and positive contributors to the future than on the playing field, in the swimming pool, on the basketball court, etc. There's just no better place to do it than sports. When athletes have double goal coaches who have a first goal of winning on the scoreboard, but a second more important goal of using sports to develop better competitors and better people, they have a chance to become what we call triple impact competitors. A triple impact competitor is a person who makes himself better, makes her teammates better, and makes the game better by the way he or she competes. But we can't do that. We can't help kids achieve their potential as athletes, as competitors, and as individuals and citizens if kids are damaged. And we have right now a national teachable moment because of the high-profile charges of abuse against high-profile people. And from Positive Coaching Alliance standpoint, we really felt like we have to take advantage of this teachable moment. Now, we're not experts in preventing child abuse or sexual abuse of kids, but we are part of a network. We have allies. I always say that Positive Coaching Alliance, the most important word in our name is alliance. We can't do anything by ourselves, but we can work with schools, youth sports organizations, and all kinds of other people to transform the culture of youth sports so we can produce great competitors, great people from sports. One of the great things about my experience with Positive Coaching Alliance is all the great people I've gotten to meet. You're going to meet 2 of them tonight, Mike Town and Irene van der Zande, and I'll introduce them in a minute. I want to mention that this is it's not as easy to have an interactive session on a webinar as it is if we were in a room together in a location. But we are going to try to make this as interactive as we can. There is a question function that should be on the right side, bottom right of your screen. And if questions come up, please use that to send those questions. Courtney Pollock, who's our Director of Product Management, is on the line with us. And what we commit to is that we're going to answer some of your questions live tonight. And we will answer every one of your questions via email within 48 hours of this. So if you do have questions that come up, please feel free to ask them. Our experts today, first of all, Mike Town. Mike is a retired family court judge in Honolulu. He's an outstanding coach and leader. He's now developing another career in mediation. He's been a practitioner of positive coaching in all aspects of his life. As a family court judge, he's often working with families in trouble. And even before he got to know Positive Coaching Alliance, before Positive Coaching Alliance even existed, he was the kind of judge that you'd want to have if you're in court, because he really saw the potential in kids and families and filled their emotional tanks. He's now teaching and coaching other judges around the country about how to use his techniques. He's also just a fantastic workshop presenter for PCA. And for those of you who know the term mensch, which is a Yiddish term, Mike Town is a mensch. When I asked my daughter-in-law's father, who is a rabbi, what mensch meant, he said, mensch means a solid person. And I thought of one person's definition of what a guru is, someone who does not wobble, a solid person who does not wobble. And Mike Town is a mensch. He's a solid, wonderful person who does not wobble, and I really feel fortunate to call him my friend. Irene van der Zande is doing great work with her organization that she founded, Kidpower. Irene is the kind of person, I describe her as an old friend who I recently met for the first time. Just getting to know her and feeling like I've known her forever. She's doing incredible training with kids and adults to practice behaviors and verbal routines that kids can use to protect themselves. Big focus on bullying as well as child abuse prevention. For example, she's going to talk a lot today, but one example she shared with me about helping kids deal with bullies is that often a kid will go to a teacher on the playground and say, you know, so-and-so is picking on me, and the teacher will say, stop whining. And one of the things she teaches kids to say when they're being bullied is to say, I want to make a report. And just that different vocabulary, I want to make a report because I'm being bullied, and then to be persistent. If that teacher doesn't respond, to keep coming back to that teacher, to go to the principal. So the materials, the ideas that Irene and Kidpower have developed are just so valuable. And then the practice that they're giving kids and adults to protect them. Kidpower is an amazing resource, and I feel lucky that we have Kidpower advising us in Positive Coaching Alliance. So I think my screen is not advancing. We should have moved to the second screen.
Jim, I think we might want to just pause for a moment here. We're having some technical difficulties with our PowerPoint freezing, which is always the way. But we'll give it.
I'm going to keep going because the next three slides are talking about who we all are, and I think we've just I just told you that. I do want to say that this webinar tonight is for youth sports leaders and coaches. And a week from today, February 9th, we're going to be doing a webinar for parents on how parents can keep themselves or help their kids be safe. Now that the PowerPoint is not frozen, let's go to the next one. Okay, so I'm going to let the PowerPoint catch up with us because we value your time and we want to get this out. The agenda for today, which is on a slide that will be coming up soon. First of all, we're going to share some things that we feel like every coach and every youth sports leader should know about this issue of protecting kids. Secondly, some specific actions you can take to protect kids. Third, some resources that PCA and Kidpower have developed that are useful for you. Fourthly, your questions. I want you to not hesitate to send your questions using that question function at the lower right part of your screen. Whenever you have a question, don't wait. But we're going to have a special time at the end to answer questions, and then we're going to talk about the next steps. So let's jump right in here. And I'm going to turn to Mike Town first. And Mike, what I'd like to ask you is, first of all, if you want to share a little bit about why this is such an important issue and how you've gotten involved with it. And then a two-part question. What is the impact of sexual and child abuse on kids? And why is it so important for youth sports leaders and coaches to work to prevent it?
Thank you, Jim, and welcome everyone. How I got into this, we were talking about. In 1979, I became a judge, and I worked with a unified family court that had some 50,000 new cases ranging from divorce to paternity to child abuse, etc. And what I learned right away was much of this has to be learned, so I became a student of families and children in distress. And it became someone like one of my heroes, Mark Twain. He said, a riverboat pilot is the toughest job in the world, and you have to relearn it every new day. As soon as you think you know it, you're going to run into a snag. So the impact of sexual and child abuse can be devastating. It can be only a bump in the road. And I want to make clear that they're not all the same. It's not a one size fits none, one size fits all. Some kids are resilient. They come from healthy families. It can be difficult for a while, but it's a bump in the road. That's rare. But we have to take our lead from the child, not from our reaction to, we have to look and see how the child's handling it. The opportunity is to model solid problem solving within the family, within the community, using a team of professionals. I call those circles of safety and protection. The family and the people involved have to wrap themselves around these kids, so to speak, and make sure safety is more important, and certainly more important than blame. Accountability and blame is what I trade in as a judge, having been a judge, what now, I don't know, over 30 years and now retired. I should also add, Jim, that I am now in the Hawaii Paroling Authority because I flunked retirement. I came back as a part-time parole commissioner, so I'm in prisons most days of the week for 2 or 3 hours hearing prisoners tell me why they ought to get out. Many of them are convicted sex assaulters. It's time for the family to come together calmly as I see it, and this impact can be a teachable moment so the kids learn how to respond to a crisis rather than have everybody around them think the sky is falling. It may be falling for the kid, but it shouldn't be for us adults. Keeping a lid on confidentiality is important so people can process this. And as I mentioned, just to repeat it, I've seen kids weather the storm better than their parents, and I've seen the opposite. Lastly, Jim, what do I tell perpetrators? I tell them up front, eyeball to eyeball, and try to have them repeat it back as a judge who's doing adjudication, who's doing sentencing, who's doing revocations, that if there is a perpetrator who's admitted or adjudicated, they've stolen a child's innocence. They have stolen a child's trust. That a child is not a little adult, can't make these decisions, and for a minute, the child should not bear any blame or any shame, but they do, and Irene will talk about it. Children have no capacity or judgment to refuse an adult. This goes for adolescents. This goes for young adults, as we've learned recently in the news. When faced with an adult in authority who's abusive, victims are not surrounded by intact, caring, trusting family, and they can't say no. So I just hope today that you ask why is it so important for YS youth sports organization leaders to prevent it. I think by all saying the same things, being transparent, accountable, we can immunize these kids from it ever occurring by letting them know they're caring adults who will ask the hard questions.
Hey, Mike,
so I think I can stop there.
You mentioned that they're in prison, they're convicted sexual abusers.
Oh, yes.
Guess is that a lot of people who have been convicted of crimes and are in prison were themselves abused, and that may be part of why they went off the wrong side.
You're right. Not that that's an excuse, but sometimes the modeling, and I think Irene will talk about it. Guesstimates by experts are estimates for 1 out of 3 girls under 18 and 1 out of 6 boys. And so you can imagine that we as coaches, we as sports leaders, kids right in our teams and our organizations have suffered some kind of abuse. So, and some kids will sometimes pass it on.
That one of the reasons we're doing this tonight is because we hope this can actually save lives. Mike, let me ask you another question. What should a YSO leader, youth sports organization leader, or a coach do if someone reports abuse to him or her, or even suspicion of abuse?
Good question. Irene's going to talk about it. Take a deep breath. Realize that your intellect, your adult leadership has to trump emotion, and that's very difficult. And then it has to be reported, in my view. It's not a question whether it happened or not. It's whether there's any kind of suspicion. And then you have to trust the authorities. That can be hard for people, because and oftentimes it's mandated. To be judge and jury and decide nothing happened is wrong. You have to let the experts like Irene and the police and child protection people wrestle with it. So I think it's very important to report it, and certainly to write it down in a confidential way.
Mike, what if it's not a matter of report, but what if a leader or a coach suspects child abuse but really has no hard evidence?
But, you know, I wrestled with that one. What is hard evidence? Somebody has to see it with their own eyes? Does the kid have to tell them? Or is it that gut, the hair in the back of your neck, I call it that gut feeling, what Malcolm Gladwell calls blink. And I think you've got to trust your own judgment. If in doubt, what's more important, child safety or preserving a relationship? And I would certainly ask an expert, but if in doubt, report it, and the authorities will say, that's not enough evidence, it's unsubstantiated. But they'll at least go out and talk to the child or talk to the people. That's a very interesting question you're asking, because we are not judges and juries as coaches. We need to just trust our gut, so to speak.
You know, we at Positive Coach Alliance, we talk a lot about moral courage. You know, physical
Yes.
courage is the burning building, and you go in that building to rescue a child or something. But a lot of bad things happen because people don't exercise their moral courage, their willingness to stand up for what they think is right, even when it's uncomfortable. And it seems like maybe there's nothing more uncomfortable than having somebody report to you that they think someone who's a friend of yours might be abusing a kid. Any advice for anyone who might might hear from someone that a friend of yours might be abusing?
Yeah, I think I would thank them for trusting me enough for my advice. And then what you have to do, if there's any doubt, it's the same as a stranger, or more important, because the friendship should not insulate the child from safety. And as you say, moral courage is doing the right thing even when it's uncomfortable, horribly uncomfortable. Doesn't mean automatically, Jim, that your name's going to be known unless you want to tell your friend, and that may be necessary because they're going to figure it out pretty quickly. It usually comes out. Irene will talk later about secrets. These secrets are seldom kept, and people are going to say, I wonder who ratted them out. Well, you know, you have to do it. And I've seen that time and time and time again in every single one of the scores or hundreds of cases I've handled. So child safety is more important than a friendship, is all I can say. And if nothing happened, they should be thankful that the process has ruled it out, so to speak.
Mike, one last question before we move on to Irene. If somebody tells me about it and I report it, or I just report suspected abuse, can I be confident that it will be kept confidential?
I would say no, but every effort is made. If the authorities can learn about the abuse directly from the child or from third parties, oftentimes it's teachers or counselors, it could be the coach, then it will be confidential. But again, people may have to testify or sign an affidavit. What happened, happened, and the truth is the truth. And I understand those pressures in a small town or in a league. So it's not automatically confidential, but every possibility is made. And if it goes to court, somebody has to testify. Of course, it's the opposite of confidentiality.
Yeah. Mike, thank you. We'll, I'm sure, come back to you later in this webinar. Irene, a couple questions to get started with you. I'd love to hear how you got into this whole business. And then if you could let our listeners know something about Kidpower and what that organization is all about.
Well, thank you, Jim, and Mike, your presentation was great. So the reason I do this work is because in 1985, when my children were young, a man threatened to kidnap my own children and a group of children I had with me. I stopped him by yelling, and by yelling at a bystander for help. But having that experience really took away forever for me the belief that bad things wouldn't happen because I'm a good person and I'm careful. And I gathered with many people, law enforcement experts, martial artists, educators, and parents to create programs that would be fun for kids and safe and empowering and really work. And also at the same time realizing that we had to create training for adults, that adults needed to know how to advocate for kids and how to intervene if they saw an unsafe situation. I feel really honored to be participating in this webinar with you. You know, there's a really sad book called Under My Roof, which was written by a mother who had had her kids abused under her roof. And I think about the sports community and the feeling that under your roof is so shocking that things like abuse would happen, and yet we know it can happen anywhere and everywhere, and what I so admire is that you're doing something about it.
Well, Irene, the other thing that occurs to me is that successful abusers don't look like shady people necessarily.
No.
They work hard to look respectable, and if we think about you know, Willie Sutton, the bank robber, was asked why he robbed banks, and he said, well, that's where the money is. Predators tend to go where their kids, and there are lots and lots of kids in youth sports. So I think that's another reason why I felt this was so important to PCA get involved with this, because it's a really hard problem to deal with, but we have to deal with it. Would you tell us a little bit about, maybe start with what Kidpower's principle is, and then more about what you do?
Okay. Well, our underlying principle is that the safety and healthy self-esteem of a child are worth causing anyone embarrassment, inconvenience, or offense, which I don't think anybody listening to this would argue with, except that how many people listening do you suppose hate to feel embarrassed, or hate to embarrass other people, or don't like to be bothered when they're busy and might not like to bother most other people, or don't like the feeling of people being mad at them? And then you think how many children feel the same way. And the reality is that while it's true that safety and healthy self-esteem are more important, embarrassment, inconvenience, and offense are powerful feelings that get in the way. And what we teach in Kidpower is how to use the power that you have as a child, as a parent, as a youth advocate of any kind, to assess what's going on in different situations, and to take charge of the emotional and physical safety of the young people in your care, and to teach them how to do just what Mike was talking about, have them practice how to speak up to adults who might be in positions of authority if those adults are doing things that are unsafe, and how not to keep problems a secret. You know, boundaries, I'd like to go on to boundaries, because boundaries in sports make it possible to play the game. And boundaries with people help us to have more fun and less problems in our relationships. And so we've come up with some very clear and simple rules that we teach to kids as soon as they can talk, and all the way through to senior citizens, frankly. And I want to illustrate these rules with a personal story, because when my son was 8 years old, he used to like to say to me, "Mom, my body belongs to me, so I do not have to take a bath." And I'd say, it's true that you belong to yourself, but some things are not a choice, and you must take a bath. And he'd say, "I'll tell." And I say, "Go ahead, tell the whole world your mom made you take a bath." And that was fine. But what we then tell kids is, but what if I had said, "Oh, please don't tell. That'd be too embarrassing." Well, the reality is that even if I'm Aaron's mom, if I ask him to keep a problem a secret, then I'm making a mistake. We want kids to understand that problems should not be secrets. And also, if you go on to the next slide, that touch should not be a secret. And games should not be a secret. Alone time with adults should not be a secret. And that kids need to know what is and is not their choice, because being stopped when hitting, for example, is not a choice. If you need a cavity filled at the dentist, you may hate that touch, but it's not a choice. But being, roughhousing, that ought to be the choice of each person and safe. And if you want to roughhouse in the middle of class, that's probably not going to be allowed. And in any case, it's just never a secret. I think about that sad news story that's just come up of this little girl who was abused by her second-grade teacher in Clovis, California, and he kept her in and played games with her. And she didn't understand that those games were not safe games. And thankfully, her mother was vigilant and saw that her daughter wasn't out on the playground one day and took action. One of the things, because you don't want people get afraid, and it doesn't really help kids for adults to be afraid. It helps kids when adults can listen to them and empower them with skills. And one of the things anyone can do is if you're worried as a coach or a youth sports leader or as a parent, is you can just say to kids, is there anything you've been wondering or worrying about that you haven't told me? And then really listen to the answers without lecturing, and because you want to get kids in the habit of talking about the things they're thinking about.
You know, Irene,
yes.
Just thinking about helping kids feel okay about protecting their boundaries, to say, you know, it's okay if everybody else on this team likes roughhousing with the coach. It's okay for me to not like it.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
That just seems like such a gift to give a kid.
Yes, and that kids want connection in different ways. And I think it's so important to know one child, it might be talking about something they're interested in doing. Another child wants a lot of physical attention. And really being aware that you can give kids a choice about this kind of touch or games it can change their life.
Irene, the next slide talked about what coaches, parents, teachers, leaders can say to kids to help them protect them from abuse. And I'd love to have you address that.
Yes, because kids need to know that if someone abuses them, it's not their fault and that it's never too late to tell. We had two girls who were students who were who on the way home from class, the older girl said to her mom, I need to talk to you. And later when they spoke, she said, Kidpower says that problems should not be secrets and it's never too late to tell. And then she talked about their neighbor who had been abusing her and her little sister. And what I would hope is if you could just repeat this statement about, we're going to be making these PowerPoints available to people. I know you are. So that just if people were just say this to kids once a year.
Irene, why don't you say it? Why don't you read it so people both see it and hear it?
Good. And to say it in a real matter-of-fact, upbeat way. This is not. You don't want to be scary when you talk about things like this. This is just interesting and useful and important information. So sometimes adults do things to hurt kids or make them uncomfortable or unsafe. If this happens to you or anyone you know, it is not your fault, and it does not mean anyone is a bad person. It does mean that help is needed. The way to get help is to tell adults you trust and to keep telling until someone does something to fix the problem. And if one adult does not listen, find another adult to tell. And remember, it is never too late to tell. And then you can turn to kids and say, and you can always tell me.
I think that persistence, to keep telling, if you think about what is, if you had to say what's one of the top 1, 2, or 3 things that makes people successful in life, persistence is it. It's one of those top ones, and I think that's just a thing. What occurs to me is that not to carry this around in a card necessarily or memorize it, but to just practice it enough in front of the mirror or whatever so that you know what the main points are and you can tell that, or even maybe do read it to your team at the beginning of a season to say this stuff. I think what Mike said earlier about some kids who haven't had any problems with this, it's just, okay, that's fine. But kids who may have had some problems, this is like a lifesaver. We talked a little bit, Irene, about if an adult tells a coach or a youth sports leader, what if a child says something about being abused or seeing another child being abused?
Well, I think if we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. The first thing is you need to know that it's heartbreaking. If you fear that a child that you're working with and that you care about, I mean, any child, even when we hear about it in the news, we get upset. And so you have a huge acting job, because if you act upset, kids are more likely to retract the story. If you act leading questions, it can even undermine the investigation and work against the child. So you take a big breath, you get centered, and you say, thank you for telling me. Everyone deserves to be safe, and I will figure out what to do to get help. And again, you don't ask for details. If we can go to the next slide.
Say more about why you don't ask for details.
Because later when it goes to court, and Mike could say more about this, but if somebody who's defending somebody who's being prosecuted for child abuse is able to show that maybe adults' fearful questions or just leading questions may have caused the child to say things that the child didn't mean, it makes it harder to prosecute. So you just want to know who it is. If a child asks you to keep a problem a secret, this is where if you say problems aren't secrets and that we're going to get help, then you have a plan. So that's a foundation for kids. Remember that your job is to simply document what happens, not to verify. And so you want to write down what the child said, and you want to report it to authorities. If you think a child is in immediate danger of being abused again, you don't let that child go away from you. You call 911 and you keep the child with you. A lot of situations are more subtle and or a little oblique, and so you may let the child go, but then you follow up with the authorities, make sure action is taken. Even if you've passed it on to someone else, I think we all know this now, it's your job to make sure that that child is safe as best you can.
You know, what strikes me is...
Courtney, I was wondering if I could jump in with a relevant question at this point that we've received.
Go ahead, Courtney.
We got a question from someone that said, should you report something like this if you're an adult and you hear someone tell you this? Should you report it to the parents of the child first, or should you go to the authorities?
It depends on if the child's saying, my parent's abusing me, or a member of my family is abusing me, you go to the authorities, and you might also tell the parents, but you want to get help. You go to Child Protective Services or to whoever the reporting agency is in your state and your community. And then now if the child's talking about somebody that's not in the immediate family, then you can do both. You want to you can tell the parents what happened, but you also still want to get professional help.
I think one of the things about the law here is that's really good, and this goes back to the conversation with Mike earlier about what if it's a friend who's being accused. Oftentimes, you have no choice. By the law, you're required to do this, and I think that takes a little bit of the burden off somebody. I have to do this, whether I think it's valid or not. I also want to say, Irene, that what struck me when you were talking is that in this situation, it's better to be wrong about abuse and act than to be right and not act. That if you let it go, like you say, if a kid you think is in danger, you don't let that kid go away. And I think sometimes we feel like, oh my God, what if I report this and it turns out to be nothing, and I'm going to, that's okay.
That's exactly right. And I've heard many a story of somebody where it was a misunderstanding, but it got checked out, and the message to the child was that when I'm worried about something, somebody's going to do something about it. And people who care, they may be pretty upset with you, but they really want kids to be safe. and this is necessary. Once I had when my child was a baby, the baby seat slipped out of my hands, and this was before they had the padding, and he got a skull line fracture. And it automatically was, because I wasn't with my regular pediatrician, was reported to Child Protective Services, and I got a call from them. And I said, I am horrified that you're calling me, and I am so thankful that you do what you do. It was the right thing.
Yeah, that's lovely. One more question, Irene. One of the things we tell coaches is to, maybe you're annoyed that you have to worry about this when you're just not abusing anybody, and why should you have to do it? And we tell coaches, get over it. This is really a good thing. The abuse is not a good thing, but the spotlight on this abuse is a good thing. And for me as a coach to have to be a little more careful about things and to learn some things so I can protect kids, that's really a good thing, even if it's a little inconvenient. But what does a coach do, or an adult of any kind, but let's say a coach, how can they protect themselves from being falsely accused of abuse?
That's a great question. And can we go to the next slide? Because we have some guidelines for this. First of all, this might seem obvious, but act in a way you'd be comfortable with everyone knowing about. Because if you do, and if you make a mistake, suppose that you accidentally touched a child because you're being physical together, and you might accidentally touch a child in an inappropriate way, and you say, "Oops, I'm sorry," and you talk about it with the child's parents if there's any worry that that this might, that there might be a lasting concern of any kind. You want to really assess whether or not you should be alone with the child. Now, if your relationship with the child is such that you should be alone to get a professional or personal relationship, that's fine. But as a coach or a youth sports leader, you're there for the team, and you're there for working with a group of children. So you want to use good judgment, because obviously if a child, you don't want to leave a child if their ride didn't come. You want to make a plan to get them to somewhere that's safe, but you don't want to automatically be alone with kids. And even if you have to have a private conversation, maybe you can have it where other people can see you rather than in a room by yourself. And we really believe that kids should have one-on-one relationships with adults, but we want to think about the situations where we do that. The number 3, respecting kids' boundaries about touch and other kinds of connection. We've already really talked about that. But we want to make sure that we're not assuming that children want a hug. And sometimes that they might want to hug one day and not another day, and that is just fine. People really do fear being accused of abuse. We sometimes work with physical therapists where kids hate the therapy, and they might even say, stop or I'll tell, and yet they're doing their job. That's what they have to do. And so we teach physical therapists to say things like, it's okay that you don't like this. I have to do it for your safety, and you can tell the whole world what we're doing. So it becomes a teachable moment. It's okay that kids don't like everything we do. Sometimes it's our job. And I'm sure that's true. It's true in sports as it is in other places. We want to make sure that we are really taking charge of the climate that kids are in, and modeling, not making jokes about sexual behavior, not acting in a way that sexualizes young people, and really setting a standard among athletes that they're going to be speaking respectfully about people. This can really help with bullying. It's not just about sexual abuse, but also just being respectful and insisting on that. And then finally, if a child does say, you abused me, instead, if you get defensive and you say, oh, no, that didn't happen, then you're working against what we're trying to teach kids. Instead, you can say, thank you for telling me. I'm sorry this upset you, and problems shouldn't be secret, so we're going to talk this over. And you can tell it, and then you talk with the parents, and you should, of course, also talk with your supervisors so that it is not a secret and you know what to do. You want to stop this disrespectful behavior with the same commitment you would stop unsportsmanship-like behavior. I remember being in a class once and having somebody say, these two middle school boys were running past me, and one said to the other, "You run like a girl." And I looked at them over my sunglasses and I said, I take it that was not a compliment. And they both looked kind of sheepish, and I then went to their teacher and I said, could you please talk about women athletes? And anyway, we addressed the issue. You don't just let even little things go by, and that can make such a change. And by creating that climate, you make accusations of abuse or harassment much less likely.
Irene, how long have you been working with Kidpower? When did you start it?
Kidpower was founded in 1989. We've been doing this for over 2 decades.
It strikes me these 6 ways are just so profound, and number 6 especially. I know in working with Positive Coaching Alliance now for 13 years, when you keep working at these things, you get to a deeper level, and I'm just really impressed with the wisdom embodied in what you've shared with us. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
If we could go to the next slide, one of the things we've been doing, working with Mike, Town, and with Irene and Kidpower, is to develop some materials that help youth sports leaders, coaches, and parents. And so I want to talk about a template that we've developed. If every youth sports organization in the country has a policy and procedures that will make it more likely kids are going to be safe, that's a wonderful thing. But does every youth sports organization in the country have to develop their own set of policies? So what we've done is we've worked with Kidpower and our own attorney to produce a template that youth sports organizations can use, and it's on our website. And we'll get that. Oh, I guess at the bottom of this, if you go to bottom of the slide, www.positivecoach.org. That's PCA's website / and you can either print this out, or on that home page there's a thing that says Our Tools. You go down that, it says Tools for Leaders, and then when you get there you can click on this document. But first of all, a policy statement that says, as a youth sports organization, the safety and well-being of the kids in our program is a top priority, and we strive to put safety first with everything we do. So we want to hear about concerns you have as parents or coaches. This is really important to us as an organization. Then in terms of the policies and procedures, first I want to talk about coach recruitment. The goal should be not just to prevent abusers from getting into your organization. That's absolutely a goal. But the goal really should be to get the best coaches that you can find. That's one of the reasons I started PCA, is to train coaches and how to get the best out of kids. So we think you should have a volunteer application for every coach or volunteer working with you, and explicitly ask people on that application if there have been any allegations or prior claims of sexual abuse or inappropriate contact against you. Now, a predator is probably not going to do that, but one of the things we've learned is that when organizations have policies like that and they ask these kinds of questions, sometimes it causes people with bad intentions to say, this organization may be a little dicey for me. I'm going to go find another organization. And that's great for the kids in your organization. So that volunteer application with references and somebody from the organization checking those references. Secondly, screening. We really think you should interview coaches. And ask specific questions about issues like this. Thirdly, background checks. Background checks are not necessarily going to, they're not a panacea. They don't uncover every problem. But you really should do them, because you may, first of all, you may uncover problems. Secondly, an abuser who has been arrested or charged in another jurisdiction, the fact that you do the background check may cause them to not get involved with your organization. And we think that even for current coaches, that this background check should be updated at least every 5 years. Second, to hold an orientation. Irene and Kidpower and Positive Coaching Alliance are going to be working on an online training program that you can use for the coaches in your organization. That's going to take a little while. But to start with, to have an orientation so that you have a meeting before the season starts with all your coaches and volunteers, and a designated person from the board of directors goes over this policy with people and asks them to sign a statement that they received it. And then to have an orientation with parents. It's, you could do these together. It probably makes sense if you can do it, to do them separately, one for the coaches and volunteers and one for the parents. Then to define prohibited behaviors and behaviors you discourage. And I think this is where Irene's wisdom and her experience for 20 years with Kidpower has really helped us. Prohibited behavior, and this is not just about sexual abuse. This is about abuse of kids in general. So to explicitly prohibit the use of profane or degrading language, and to tell coaches they're responsible. If you have kids, first of all, you shouldn't be using profanity or degrading language. And if you have kids who are doing it with other team members, it's your job to stop them. Secondly, any kind of threat of physical injury of a minor should be prohibited, and not just like, oh, I was just kidding. If a coach threatens to physically injure a kid, that should be prohibited. Thirdly, the obvious committing any sexual offense, engaging in any sexual contact with a minor is prohibited, and then any kind of sexual advance is prohibited. Now, those are the prohibited behaviors we're suggesting, and this is a template, so when you and your organization go through this, you may say, hey, there's one thing else we want to add. That's great, and we hope you will tell us about that so we can make this the best template policy possible. But then let's talk about discouraged behaviors, because one of the things Irene said that really struck me is that we don't want kids to not be able to have one-on-one relationships with adults. Those can be very meaningful. We just want to be careful about it. So to discourage the behavior, and here are some that we put in here, discouraging non-related one-adult, one-child interaction, rides to and from practices and games. Now, the reason this is discouraged rather than prohibited in our policy is that, if it's 9 o'clock at night and a parent or guardian hasn't picked up a kid, and you say, I'm going to have to leave you here in the dark alone because I can't, I can't drive you alone in my car, that's more dangerous. So you want to be, thoughtful about this. Indoor practice facilities behind closed doors, that's a place where you should discourage one adult, one child interaction. Locker rooms, similarly, and overnight accommodations for travel games. Lots and lots of kids, hundreds of thousands of kids in this country are on travel teams, and they're riding with their coaches. They're in hotel or motel rooms. And again, we want to discourage one adult, one child in overnight accommodations. And then again, for your organization, there may be other behaviors that you want to discourage. The fourth and last thing in this is on reporting suspected child abuse. And there really isn't anything in here that we haven't talked about, but it puts it down in black and white that first of all, the organization needs to designate at least one member of the organization, a member of the board of directors or somebody whose job it is to hear reports, to take reports, and to make that known to people. If you think there's something that you're concerned about parents or coaches, about other coaches, this is the person to come to. And also, it could be anyone on the board. So what I encourage you to do, those of you who are leaders of youth sports organizations, is to download this document. It's in a Word document format, so you can plug your name of the organization in. You can make any edits you want to do. But to take action and to adopt a policy like this. Mike or Irene, anything about this policy you'd like to say, or anything I've said here?
It looks great.
I like it. I think being in a indoors or alone with a child, all of that, we just got to be, it's better to have two adults there. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah. So let's go to the next one, which is resources, guidelines for coaches. And again, the website, I mean the URL for this, you go to our website, positivecoach.org. You look at the top and it says Our Tools, and you click on Tools for Coaches, and that'll take you to a landing page where you can click on the guidelines for coaches. And just some of the things, to learn the facts about child abuse, to as a coach, to feel like you are part of a community of coaches around the country who are committed to protecting kids from abuse. So learn what you need to learn about it. Secondly, to go through screening and training in this, understand your youth sports organization's policies. And if your organization doesn't have any policies, tell them about this template. Tell them, go to Positive Coaching Alliance website, and you really, as a youth sports organization, you need to be a leader here, and we need to have this kind of a policy. I mentioned before the idea of getting past any annoyance you may have. You know, I'm not an abuser. Why should I have to, be so careful? Again, this is a really good thing. All the attention that these high-profile cases have gotten is a good thing because it creates a teachable moment. And just get past your annoyance. Have a preseason parent meeting. Some of the things that Irene shared with you are great things to tell parents. I am concerned about your kid's safety, and I'm concerned that you have confidence in me. So if there's anything I do that causes you discomfort, tell me about it. And then have the moral courage to act and check out the resources available. There's a great resource from Kidpower. They're a blog, and that the first URL there is Kidpower, general stuff about child abuse, and the second one is the blog. So if we go to the next slide, we're almost done here, so hang in there with us, folks. If you have questions, again, use the question function at the bottom right of your screen, and we'll keep this open for 15 minutes or so you can send any questions you have, and we'll answer those within 48 hours. Are we at the last slide yet? So I want to, those of you who are coaches and youth sports organization leaders, want to invite you back next week at the same time for a webinar focused on parents. And also, even more important is to get the word out to the parents in your organization, to encourage them to attend this webinar so they can learn this sort of thing. Become informed and act, and then learn more. Go to the PCA website, the Kidpower website. Let me just ask, first of all, Mike, if you, well, first of all, Courtney, any questions that have come up?
We have a lot of questions here, Jim, so I just do want to reiterate to people that we will, we're not going to be able to answer all of them on the webinar tonight, so we will be getting back to you, as Jim said, within 48 hours. But we have one here that I wanted to ask you about, Jim, or maybe Irene or Mike. What if there's an indicator or an action that's a red flag to you, but the child hasn't told you anything specifically? What should you do at that point? Can you tell just by observing a child that something's going on? Can you just tell visually? If you could respond to that.
Irene or Mike, either of you like to take that? Or maybe both of you?
I'm happy to, and Mike might have some things to add. This is where it's very difficult. Also, there are a lot of things that are harmful to kids, but that are not against the law. And you know, somebody can humiliate children, and you know, and so we have to just be aware that a child may be going through a hard time. Parents may be going through a very bitter custody battle that could be affecting a child. So you don't want to jump to conclusions about why a child is showing signs of distress. What you also want to do is, just by putting this message out in a consistent way, not focused on the one child, but for everybody, that you're there to help, that you want kids to be safe, and that you'll help them if they come to you with a problem, that you'll do your best, creates an environment where they are more likely to be able to ask for help if they need it. And if you're really concerned, you can talk to professionals in your community. You can always, you know, when we have the specifics, it's a lot easier to give advice. People email us from all over the world asking about specific situations, and we advise them on what are the different kinds of red flags, and also on how to get help in their own communities to assess what might be going on.
Mike, anything to add to that?
Sure. Kids, I believe, well, we find that kids act out for a reason, and you've got to rule out the different reasons. And so this is one of those what they call sensitive or careful questions that has to be asked. And the professionals can do it, oftentimes teachers, counselors. So kids aren't going to communicate boldly in words. They're going to act out, and sometimes they act out through play or schools. And I would also want to emphasize, at some point when there's more than just a suspicion, a professional will conduct a therapeutic forensic interview with the child, usually in a child-friendly setting. And that's when they ask all the careful questions that you know they're so good at asking, and then we're reasonably good at interpreting.
So maybe to wrap this up, I would just say one of the strongest lessons I've gotten from being involved with talking with Mike and Irene about this the last few weeks is that it's just so much better to act and be wrong, and rather than let something slide. So you know, and if you're embarrassed afterwards, you were totally wrong. You know, to feel good about the fact that you didn't let something slide by. And just imagine if you do let something slide by and it turns out that you know, there really was abuse going on there, because as Mike said at the beginning, this is life-changing and not in a good way for kids. So I want to thank Mike Town and Irene van der Zande. It's just been really a pleasure. Again, if you have questions, use the question function, and we'll get back to you within 48 hours. And would really love it if you would spread the word to the parents in your organizations. So the more people we can get this information out to, the better. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha.